Do you enjoy chilling stories, mysterious legends, and tales that make you think twice before turning off the lights? Then you're in the right place. On this channel, every video is a journey into the unknown, bringing you spooky tales, curiosities, and mysteries you won't find just anywhere. So hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and share this video with someone who also loves a good dark story. That way you'll help our community grow and make sure you don't miss the next tale.
The Ranch of Eternal Invitations. Told by John Baptiste Rivers, 45 years old, truck driver from Jackson, Mississippi. My name is John Baptiste, but everybody knows me as Big John, a nickname I earned after years hauling cattle across the entire South. For 23 years, I've been driving trucks on these roads, carrying merchandise from one state to another, getting to know every city, every town, every ranch lost in the middle of nowhere. I've driven over 2 million miles on these dirt roads and highways, seen landscapes that take your breath away, and also things I'd rather forget forever. I work mainly on the route between Jackson, Mississippi and Mobile, Alabama, but I also do freight runs to Atlanta, Birmingham, New Orleans, depending on demand and the price they offer. It's a hard profession that requires you to spend days away from home, sleeping in the truck cab, eating at roadside diners, dealing with all kinds of dangers these roads offer. But what happened to me on a March dawn in 2021 was something that completely changed my way of seeing the world and understanding the mysteries that exist in this vast South. I was coming back from a delivery in Atlanta, loaded with agricultural products that needed to arrive in Jackson before noon the next day. It was a heavy load, about 15,000 pounds of irrigation equipment, and I was driving slowly, not to strain my old Peterbilt too much, which already had over 500,000 miles on it, but still served me faithfully. It was a dark night, no moon, with clouds covering the stars. The kind of night truckers know well, silent, solitary, where the only sound is the engine's rumble and the noise of tires on asphalt. I'd been driving for over 8 hours straight, stopping only to fuel up and eat something, anxious to get home and rest at least a few hours before the next trip. I was on a secondary road that cut through a rural region between Mobile and Jackson, an area I knew well after years making that route. It was a region of old plantations, many abandoned after families migrated to the city or sold the land to big agribusiness companies. Properties that had once been prosperous, with big houses, slave quarters, corrals full of cattle, today were just ruins covered by vegetation. Around 2:30 in the morning, I felt the truck start to pull slightly to the right. I knew that sign well. Flat tire. It was the kind of problem every trucker faces regularly, especially on secondary roads full of loose stones and holes that can easily puncture a loaded tire. I pulled over to the shoulder and got out to check the tires. As I suspected, the right rear tire was completely flat, probably punctured by some nail or sharp stone. It wasn't anything major. I always carried a spare and tools for this kind of situation, but it would be at least an hour of work under the truck on a deserted road in the middle of the night. I got the hydraulic jack, the lug wrench, and started the work of changing the tire. It was a process I had done hundreds of times, but always time-consuming and tiring, especially with a heavy load that made lifting the truck difficult. Sweat ran down my face even in the cool dawn air, and I concentrated on the work so as not to think about the loneliness of that empty road. But that night, something was completely different from the atmosphere of abandonment that I knew. There was a yellowish light flickering in the front window of the house. I stopped my bicycle in the middle of the deserted road and stared fixedly in the direction of the property, blinking several times to make sure I wasn't imagining things because of fatigue. The light was real, weak but constant, like the flame of an old kerosene lamp, like the ones we still used in the region. It danced gently behind the dirty window, projecting moving shadows on the interior walls of the house that I could glimpse through the cracks and holes in the deteriorated structure. My first thought was of Sebastian's children. Had one of them returned from Detroit without telling anyone? Perhaps they had finally decided to take care of their father's property, do a general cleaning, try to sell it again. But I didn't see any cars parked in the front yard, no motorcycles, no sign that anyone had arrived from outside the region. And that smell, it was becoming increasingly unbearable. It was as if something was being cooked inside the house, but it was not the smell of normal food that we knew. It was something rotten, nauseating, that clung to the throat and made the eyes water. An aroma that mixed putrefaction with something being burned, creating a combination that turned the stomach. Curiosity began to speak louder than fear and common sense. After 40 decades as a midwife, I had seen many things in life that would test anyone's nerves. I had entered houses where people had died alone and remained undiscovered for days. I had witnessed births in precarious conditions that would make a city doctor faint. I dealt with life and death situations that taught me to have courage in the face of the unknown. I decided to approach to investigate what was happening in that house that should have been empty for years. I carefully dismounted from the bicycle, trying not to make noise that could scare whoever was inside. I leaned it against a tree by the roadside, tied it with a piece of rope that I always carried, and walked slowly along the path that led to the property. The ground was dry and hard under my bare feet, and each step seemed to echo in the silent night like a drum. Dry branches cracked under my weight, and I had to constantly dodge the thorns of the kudzu and honeysuckle that invaded the path, making the approach a difficult and dangerous task. My heart was pounding in my chest, but a strange force pushed me toward that house. It was as if something was pulling me, an irresistible curiosity that overcame any instinct of self-preservation I might have had. The smell grew stronger with each step, and the light in the window seemed to pulse like a luminous heart. As I approached, I could see more details of the abandoned structure. The front door was ajar, swaying slightly with the weak wind that was beginning to blow from the pine woods. The wood was rotten, with large holes where termites had made their nests. The yellowish light was coming from inside the house, a weak and dancing light that created strange shadows on the peeling and dirty walls. And there were sounds coming from inside the house. They were not just the normal noises of an old building creaking with the temperature change at dawn. There were clear sounds of human activity, the noise of pots being stirred on the stove, of chairs being dragged across the dirt floor, of heavy steps walking back and forth through the rooms, the muffled sound of someone talking to themselves.
It was impossible. The house had been abandoned for 4 years. There had been no electricity on the property since Sebastian's death, nor running water, nothing that could sustain the presence of a living person there. I reached the side window of the house and hid behind a peach tree that grew very close to the wooden wall. The trunk was thick enough to completely hide me, and the leaves cast shadows over me, protecting me from being seen by whoever was inside. From there I could see the interior of the house through the cracks in the old wood of the window that had been without glass for years. What I saw chilled me to the bone and made my soul shrink in terror. Inside, sitting calmly at the kitchen table as if it were the most natural thing in the world, was old Sebastian. It was not possible. Sebastian had died 4 years ago. I had gone to his funeral myself, had seen the simple wooden coffin being lowered into the ground at the city cemetery on a hot July afternoon. I had consoled the children who cried, tears that seemed more like guilt than genuine sadness, had talked with the neighbors who remembered the qualities of the man who had passed. But there he was, wearing the same red and blue flannel shirt he always wore on market days, the same worn leather hat on his head, the same unkempt gray beard that he could never keep well trimmed. He was stirring something in a dark clay bowl as if he were peacefully dining in the comfort of his own home. His movements were slow, almost mechanical, as if they were automatic after decades of repetition. He brought the wooden spoon to his mouth with measured gestures, chewed slowly without hurry, stirred the bowl again with circular movements. It was exactly how I remembered him doing when he was alive, in the few times I visited him to treat some wound or illness that did not require a trip to town. But there was something deeply disturbing and wrong about his face. Even in the dim and dancing light of the kerosene lamp that was on the table, I could see that his skin was too dark, stained with patches of different colors, with parts that seemed to be literally rotting and falling off. One of his cheeks was completely sunken in, as if there was no more flesh underneath, creating a sinister depression that disfigured his features. His nose seemed to be disintegrating, with missing parts that left dark holes exposed. And the hair that had always been his pride was falling apart, leaving large parts of the scalp completely exposed with dark spots that looked like open wounds. And the smell that came from the house, my God in heaven, it was absolutely unbearable. It was the unmistakable smell of rotten flesh, of death, of advanced decomposition, but bizarrely mixed with the aroma of food being cooked on the wood stove. It was as if someone were preparing a meal with completely spoiled ingredients, a combination that turned the stomach and made the head spin. I stood there, hidden behind the protective tree for several minutes that felt like hours. My rational mind desperately tried to find a logical explanation for what I was witnessing. Perhaps it was a homeless person who had taken shelter in the abandoned house and was wearing Sebastian's old clothes. Perhaps it was some distant relative I did not know. Perhaps I was hallucinating due to the extreme fatigue from the long hours of work.
But deep in my heart, in the place where we keep our deepest certainties, I knew that it was indeed the old Sebastian. I recognized his gestures, his posture, the way he stirred the food in the bowl. It was him, without a shadow of a doubt. Suddenly, he stopped eating completely and remained still for a few seconds that felt eternal. The spoon hovered in the air, dripping a dark liquid that I could not identify. Then, very slowly, as if each movement cost an immense effort, he turned his head in my direction. It was as if he knew I was there, as if he felt my presence through the walls, as if he could hear the desperate beating of my heart. Our eyes met through the cracked and dirty window, but they were not the tired and gentle eyes of Sebastian that I had known in life. In place of the brown and melancholic eyes that reminded me of the sadness he carried since the death of his wife, there were two dark cavities, deep as bottomless wells, that seemed to suck all the light from the lamp and plunge the environment into an even deeper darkness. It was like looking into two holes that led to nothingness, to absolute emptiness, to a place where there was no life or hope. He looked at me for long seconds, without blinking, without moving, without showing any expression. It was as if he was studying my presence, deciding what to do with me. Then, slowly, his lips opened into a smile. It was a smile too wide to be human, impossible for any living person. His lips stretched until they almost reached his ears, tearing the dry skin and creating fissures that left the raw flesh exposed. He showed rotten and yellowed teeth, some completely missing, others broken in half, creating a macabre set that looked more like the teeth of a wild animal. His gums were completely black, as if they had been necrotic for some time, and from his mouth began to drip a viscous and dark liquid that fell into the clay bowl. I had never felt such terror in my entire life. The survival instinct finally spoke louder than curiosity. I ran back to the bicycle, stumbling over stones and roots, tearing my skirt on the thorns of the kudzu, scratching my legs on the barbed wire fences, without looking back for even a second. I could hear behind me the disturbing sound of a chair being violently dragged across the dirt floor, as if he had quickly gotten up from the table to follow me. I got on the bicycle with my hands shaking so much that I could barely hold the handlebars. I pedaled as fast as I could, pushing my legs to the limit, ignoring the fatigue I felt in my back and arms. The lamp swung violently with the abrupt movements, creating dancing shadows on the road that made me imagine dark figures chasing me through the darkness. I only slowed down when I saw the first houses on my street, with their lamplights in the windows and the familiar smell of food being prepared for the workers waking up early. I arrived home completely out of breath, sweaty and in a state of deep shock. My husband Joe was still awake, sitting in the rocking chair on the porch, worried for my unusual delay. "Woman, what face is that? You look like you've seen the devil himself,"
he said when he saw my state.
I told him everything that had happened, every detail, every second of that terrifying experience that was still etched in my memory like a branding iron. Joe listened in silence, but I could see on his face that he thought I was imagining things because of the fatigue and stress from work. Mary, you worked more than 10 hours straight today. You must be exhausted. And that story about the light in old Sebastian's house? It must have been some reflection from your lamp, some optical illusion caused by fatigue. You know that the mind plays tricks on us when we're very tired. But I knew, with absolute certainty, that it had not been imagination or hallucination. That nauseating smell was still stuck in my nostrils, ingrained in my clothes, on my skin, in my soul. Those empty eyes and deep marks were etched into my memory like a branding iron. And that impossible smile, that macabre smile, haunted my thoughts like a waking nightmare. I spent the entire night awake, sitting on the porch rocking chair, drinking lemon balm tea to try to calm my nerves, constantly glancing in the distant direction of Sebastian's house. I couldn't get the image of him sitting at the table, eating something from that clay bowl, with his decomposed face and those dark holes where his eyes should be. The next day, as soon as the sun rose and completely illuminated the area, I decided to return to the scene with witnesses. I couldn't rest easy without understanding what had really happened that morning. I asked my neighbor Tony and my friend Zeke to accompany me. I explained that I'd seen movement at old Sebastian's house and that I wanted to check to make sure it wasn't some trespasser taking advantage of the abandoned property. They both agreed to go with me, more out of curiosity and a desire to help than because they truly believed my story from the night before. We arrived at the property around 8 in the morning, when the sun was already strong enough to illuminate every corner of the abandoned house. In the daylight, the building looked even more decayed and haunted than I remembered. The plank walls were cracked and crumbling, with large holes where rain and wind had ripped away entire sections of siding over the years. The clay tile roof had several broken or missing tiles, and a few small trees had grown inside the house's structure, creating an almost surreal sight. We entered through the front door, which was half stuck because of rusted hinges and the wood swollen from humidity. The inside of the house was exactly what anyone would expect from a place abandoned 4 years ago. Dust covered absolutely everything in a thick layer, cobwebs in the corners and between the furniture, bat droppings scattered across the dirt floor, old furniture covered in dirty cloths that had become nests for insects. The kitchen was a small, dark space, with a rusted wood stove, a stone sink cracked in half, and a rough wooden table in the center. It was exactly there, at that simple table, that I had seen Sebastian eating dinner the night before. On the table sat a single clay bowl, cracked in several places, stained with dirt, and covered with a thick layer of dust that seemed to have accumulated for years. It seemed to have been there since the house was abandoned, forgotten, like everything else in the place. But it was when I looked more closely at the kitchen floor that my blood ran cold again. Around the table, in the dust that had accumulated over the years, there were perfectly clear footprints.
They were fresh footprints, made a few hours ago, still with the defined contours that had not been erased by the wind. Clear marks of leather boots, exactly the type that old Sebastian always wore when he went to the market or to church. The footprints formed a circular pattern around the table, as if someone had walked around it several times in a strange and disturbing ritual. Tony and Zeke also saw the footprints immediately. The three of us remained silent for several minutes, trying to process what that meant, trying to find a logical explanation for the presence of those marks in a house that should have been empty for years. "It must have been some rogue who broke into the house last night," said Tony, but his voice was uncertain and trembling. "Maybe someone who knew the old man and came looking for something of value that might be hidden." But I knew there was nothing of value in that abandoned house. Sebastian's children had taken everything worth anything when they came for the funeral. And besides, the footprints were exactly the size of Sebastian's feet.
I remembered well because sometimes when he was sick with diabetes, I had to help him put on the boots on his swollen feet, always complaining that the shoes were tight. And the smell, that sweet and rotten smell, still permeated the kitchen. It was weaker than the night before, but it was still there, especially in the area around the table. It came from nowhere specific, as if it were suspended in the air, as if it were part of the very atmosphere of the place. Zeke found more disturbing evidence in the area of the wood stove. In the opening of the oven, there were fresh ashes mixed with pieces of charcoal that still had residual heat. When he brought his hand closer, he could feel a warm temperature emanating from inside. "This was used last night," he said, touching the ashes carefully. "Someone lit a fire in this stove a few hours ago, I'm sure." Even more disturbing was what we found in the stone sink. There were scraps of food scattered, but it was not normal food. There were pieces of meat that had a strange, greenish color, exuding a nauseating smell. Bones that seemed to have been gnawed with superhuman strength, broken and cracked in a way that no human could do. And dark stains that looked like coagulated blood, but had a viscous consistency and a smell too sweet to be blood from any animal we knew. "What the hell kind of animal eats something like this?" murmured Zeke, covering his nose with his shirt. But the most frightening of all was what we found in the master bedroom, where Sebastian used to sleep when he was alive. The bed was still there, a simple wooden frame with a straw mattress that had been attacked by termites over the years. The sheets were yellowed and dirty, but there was something that made us stop at the door of the room with our hearts racing. The sheets were rumpled, with clear marks that someone had slept there recently. The depression in the mattress still preserved the shape of a body, and on the pillow there was a deep mark of a head, a depression that still had some gray hairs stuck to the worn fabric. Hairs identical to those Sebastian had when he was alive, the same color, the same thick texture dried out by the southern sun. But the most disturbing thing was that the hairs seemed to have been forcibly pulled out, with small pieces of scalp still attached to the roots, as if someone was literally falling apart, losing pieces of themselves every time they laid their head on the pillow. We also found scattered throughout the house other impossible-to-explain evidence. Sebastian's old clothes were spread across the floor, as if they had been worn recently and then carelessly thrown aside. They all had the same nauseating smell that permeated the entire house, and some had dark stains that looked like decomposing bodily fluids. In the living room, Sebastian's favorite rocking chair, a chair he had made himself decades ago, was still rocking slightly, as if someone had just gotten up from it. The movement was smooth but constant, and there was not enough wind inside the house to justify that continuous rocking. In the backyard, we discovered more disturbing signs. There were fresh footprints in the dirt around the well, as if someone had walked there during the early morning. And when we looked into the well, which had been dry for years, we saw animal bones scattered at the bottom. But they were not old bones, they were fresh bones, with remnants of flesh still clinging, as if animals had been thrown in there recently. "Mary," Tony said with a trembling voice, "I think it's better if we get out of here. There is something very wrong with this place." We left the property in silence, all deeply disturbed by what we had seen. On the way back, Tony and Zeke tried to find rational explanations for all of it. They talked about intruders, homeless people, the possibility of some distant relative returning to take care of the property. But their voices were uncertain, and I could see in both of their eyes that they were also scared. I said nothing during the journey. I knew it was useless to insist on my version of the facts. I knew they needed to process that experience in their own way, to find their own explanations, to be able to sleep at night. But I knew the truth. I had seen Sebastian the night before. I had looked directly into the dark holes that had replaced his eyes. I had seen that impossible smile form on his decomposing face. The evidence, what we found in the house, only confirmed what I already knew deep in my heart. Old Sebastian had not left when he died. He was trapped in that house, condemned to eternally repeat the actions of his last days of life, dining alone at the kitchen table, walking through the empty rooms, sleeping in a bed that was now just a nest of memories and ghosts, cooking macabre meals on the wood stove, feeding on things that the living should not even imagine. In the following days, I tried to maintain a normal routine, attending to my patients, taking care of my family, trying to forget what I had witnessed, but it was impossible to get that experience out of my head. Every night, when I closed my eyes, I saw Sebastian's decomposed face looking at me through the cracked window. I began to have constant nightmares. I dreamed that I was back in that house, sitting at the table with Sebastian, eating from the same clay bowl while he smiled with that overly wide smile. I would wake up sweating, with the taste of rotten meat in my mouth, as if I had truly participated in those macabre meals. During the day, I tried to convince myself that it was all just coincidences, fatigue, imagination. But at night, when darkness took over the rural areas, I knew that Sebastian was there, continuing his impossible existence in that abandoned house. I never passed that road again during the early morning. Whenever I need to go to that region for a delivery or medical consultation, I wait for the sun to rise completely or ask for a ride from someone who has a car. And when people ask me why I changed my routine, I just say that that road has become dangerous in the dark, that it has many potholes and it's easy to have an accident. Because some truths are too heavy to be shared with those who are not prepared to receive them. There are forces in this world that our science cannot explain, energies that our rational mind cannot comprehend. And when we encounter these forces, when we witness phenomena that challenge everything we have learned about life and death, the only wisdom is to humbly accept that there are mysteries that must remain mysteries. Old Sebastian's house still stands there today, officially abandoned, taken over by the wild-growing brush. But sometimes, when I pass by during the day, especially when the wind blows in the right direction, I swear I can smell that sweet and rotten scent being carried by the breeze. And at night, the nearest neighbors, who live kilometers away, say they still see a faint light flickering in the front window, a light that dances as if it were a living flame. Some places, I have learned, hold more than just the memories of those who lived there. They hold presences, energies, pieces of soul that became trapped within them, worlds of the living and the dead. And some of these presences are better left in peace, respected from a distance, avoided, as our ancestors taught us to do through the generations. Because not all the dead find the eternal rest they deserve after a life of work and suffering. And not all those who are trapped between the worlds have good intentions with the living who venture into their dark domains. Do you enjoy chilling stories, mysterious legends, and tales that make you think twice before turning off the lights? Then you're in the right place. On this channel, every video is a journey into the unknown, bringing you spooky tales, curiosities, and mysteries you won't find just anywhere. So hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and share this video with someone who also loves a good dark story. That way you'll help our community grow and make sure you don't miss the next tale.